Thank you for calling. Please leave a message.
They build it, that's where I'm going to go.
By why, I mean what's your purpose? If you're going to live to be in 2020, you might as well play to be in 2020.
We are one global community.
The digital revolution has just begun.
Joel, welcome to the Supercharged Entrepreneur Podcast. How are you?
I'm really well, Phil, and thank you very much for asking me. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. Joel, let me start with a really easy question. Just, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I studied health economics at university, which I found fascinating because it led to so many different paths. And I didn't find it fascinating initially because it was full of maths. But Mum and Dad basically said, if you want to go to uni, you've got to do something that's business oriented. Otherwise, you ain't going. So 8 hours a week study, off to a new city, Newcastle upon Tyne, or Newcastle. I had an absolute ball, and I learned loads about health economics, which was nothing to do with maths. I managed to connivingly network my way into areas of economics that I found far more interesting, qualitative rather than quantitative. Anyway, started working as a freelance journalist after uni because the last thing I wanted to do, in spite of my parents' wishes, was head back to the city of London, where I'm from, and work in the big smoke on those stock markets. So started writing observational journalism around health and wellness, which was pretty unknown then. There was hardly any coverage about health and wellness other than talking about serious medical conditions. And I started working in a variety of different media. Well, there were only two broadly, weren't there then? Print and broadcast before online came on. And got some broadcast experience as well, just to boost some of the work I was doing that was written for newspapers and magazines. And I was faced with this huge mixing desk, I'll never forget it, on my first day in this recording studio. I looked at it, and even though I was explaining exactly how it would all work in simple terms over a period of about 5 minutes, and I definitely pinned my ears back, I froze when faced with this huge studio mixer. And the guy said, just chill out, relax. So this happened for the next 4 weeks every time I went into the studio. I thought, this is really strange. Never really had any sort of anxious moments in my life before. Led a pretty socially cosseted life growing up, even though I grew up in East London. I think it's probably because I did boxing at school because we had to. And you learn how to look after yourself anyway. I was really curious about why I felt anxious. And I found that it was just a habit that I developed that was all to do with being a bit of a mouth breather as a kid, which manifests itself slightly later in life in anxiety. Read more about it, went to meet an amazing doctor who turned out to be the founding father of chronic hyperventilation syndrome, which is the extreme form of living your life whilst mouth breathing. And he explained to me how we should function as human beings and how I, like it was very common in the population then and even more common now, was functioning mouth breathing at night whilst I was asleep and through the day. And he talked about it being something that was habitual, nothing to do with genetics or in my DNA. And he said that we develop bad habits. We start off with good ones and we develop bad ones. He told me to go away. He gave me a protocol, and he said, as part of the protocol, write down as many bad habits as you've got or that you think you know, as well as the good ones. And I was amazed. And true to form, with some of the exercises he gave me and other things that I'd learned from him, I found out how I could restore my faith in wanting to work in broadcast media as well as other media, lost the anxiety when I was working on this huge piece of kit, and cracked on. But I didn't want to leave it there. I was so fascinated by it. And I recognized around me, because I started to move in PR circles, because I became keen to work on the other side of the fence and represent people rather than write about people on the journalism side and write about stuff. So I explored the opportunity of working in PR, and it was my first venture into the world of proper business, working for companies. So I started to notice the pace at which people worked. And with my knowledge of breathing education, I thought, you know what, based on what I know, based on what this fantastic doctor, Dr. Len McEwen, told me, he said that humans have a brain and humans have a heart that likes to work slowly. If you make it work quick, you'll quickly build up a load of stress for yourself, and at some point you'll be out of sync, and at some point it will bite you in the bum. So have a think about that, Joel, as he said to me, and I took it into the workspace. Wellness in the workplace then wasn't even a thing. Now it's unfortunately still more lip service than anything else, without sounding too cynical. But then it wasn't even a thing. But I was always mindful of how to work steady, be efficient. It wasn't about being chilled out. It was about just working efficiently and working in a more relaxed fashion to get things done, get more things done. And I've taken it with me for the last 25, 26 years. And through the practice that I've developed for myself, I've passed it on to work colleagues. And when I thought it was commercially viable enough 5 years ago, I decided to put together a business called Breathren, which was all about educating one-to-one and also within groups, particularly within businesses and community organizations, all about the virtues of breathing less to be more efficient in your life, both at sleep and work and all the other things we do. In fact, I talk about 5 different areas of life where if you breathe less, you breathe slower, you live a better quality of life, from sleep to eating to work to exercise to relaxation. And that's where I'm up to at the moment. I'm pushing that as hard as I can, albeit in an efficient and relaxed way.
Wow. I mean, there's just so much to unpack there, Joel. I mean, I'm struggling to think about where to start. So many takeaways, so much insight, so much to unpack. So let's go through that one at a time. Okay. So what I'd like to start with is, tell me a little bit more about the condition that you identified, or it was identified that perhaps you had, the chronic hyperventilation syndrome. Is that right?
I didn't have that. What I had was a minute form of it. In other words, I was on the spectrum without having chronic. So you can be mild, moderate, and chronic. So I had mild hyperventilation syndrome through developing a bad habit. I didn't have a completely stress-free life. Who would have done by the age of around, I was nearly 30 when I really found out about this. So the 2 things here. First of all, everybody is walking around with symptoms, from a young person to a teenager and through into adult life. Okay, take that for granted. We often forget about that. Secondly, some stresses that I had, I took on board, I dealt with them, but stresses always leave their mark. And stress, prolonged stress, and sometimes that's only 3 months, sometimes it's longer, can leave a mark on your breathing rate and change your breathing rate. And when your breathing rate changes, the gases in your brain change and adapt to that breathing rate, and your brain thinks it's normal to breathe quicker. So if we take that person on TV who's in a state of stress and we look at that person physically, we can often see how they breathe. We can see their shoulders hunched, we can see some chest breathing, we can hear, we can see lots of things that identify that they're under some kind of stress. So that resonates with people who have experienced that kind of stress or have seen it, and that's most people. There are others who've relatively sailed through life who can't necessarily relate to it, but most people can. So whenever you have a prolonged period of stress, the biggest issue that you face that isn't talked about is that your breathing rate can change. Now, your breathing rate and your breathing generally is the foundation of good health. It gets missed out in loads and loads of conversations by the likes of sleep experts, dietitians, nutritionists, etc. But Take it from me, and in fact, not from me. Take it from the founding father of chronic hyperventilation, Dr. Len McEwen, who shared that with me and shared it with millions since.
It's fascinating on so many levels. I'm reflecting back to the last 10, 20 years of my life and times when I've been in periods of stress or anxiety. And you're absolutely right. The more common symptoms, sweating, tension in your hands, all the things that happen when you become stressed, when you become anxious, I think they're talked about a lot more, aren't they? What's the first step, Joel, to identifying how we breathe?
What I usually do is I talk with people about the traits of hyperventilation and the signs and some of the causes. So, for example, if somebody's mouth breathing, if they can just stop mouth breathing, that's huge. Mouth breathing puts you on fight or flight. It tells your body you're in a state of stress, when often you're not. You could be walking down the street, so maybe join me, Phil, and be really, really weird. And next time you're in your local high street, look at the number of people walking past you who are mouth breathing. Slightly more difficult to see now because some people wear masks. But mouth breathing is such a no-no for a few reasons, really. So one, not so serious. If you mouth breathe, look at yourself in the mirror. You're far less attractive if you're mouth breathing. In fact, you look quite gormless. More to the point and seriously. This virus that's been kicking around for 14 months, you don't want to mouth breathe, do you? You've got no defense against any bacteria, any pollutants, any toxins that are out there. If you're walking along, you're taking them straight in. And your nose and your body, your nose in particular, has been designed in such a clever way. You've got two filters, one in each nostril, that can deal with 95% of pollutants that are wandering around in the atmosphere. 95%. It's one of the reasons why you have a great holiday. Remember when we used to get on planes? Anyway, you're coming back on the plane. You've seen that guy or woman who's snoring away, head on the headrest, not a care in the world, mouth breathing away all through the flight, gets home. Oh man, how did I get a cold? I just had 2 weeks of bliss on holiday. Well, you got a cold because you were mouth breathing on that flight and all those germs just flew into your system. So mouth breathing is certainly one of them, and just cut it out. Like us who sometimes are working with technology, sitting down, we're in that virtual space, and all we can think about is that virtual space that we're in. We start to breathe from our chest. We start to mouth breathe. We don't breathe in the way that we were designed to breathe. In other words, calm, relaxed, and through our tummies. So through the process of using technology, but you can't blame the technology, it's about us. But through the process of using technology and being at work, being on this heightened sense of anticipation because we're trying to finish something to deadline, or we're just so involved in this virtual working, our heart rate variability increases, our breathing changes, it becomes shallow, and we start to experience all these different symptoms. So if we can just be aware of our breathing when we're at work, particularly if we're stationary, sitting down, using technology, and if we can just be aware of mouth breathing when we're walking around in an environment that's outside and indoors, then we're doing ourselves a massive favor. There are other things, subtle things like sighing, sniffing, yawning with big breaths. Those three things alone tell you your CO2, which I'll come on to later, your oxygen levels, and your breathing rate is going into hyperventilation mode. So there's a few signs for you. There are other subtleties as well, but that's probably enough to tell you in this introduction.
Let's skip forward before we come back, Joel. Let's skip forward to new and improved Phil, who's breathing from his diaphragm, through his nose, calmly, deeply, relaxed. What are the benefits of breathing in this way, Joel?
Okay, great question. So visualize yourself on a beach, sitting down, and got a care in the world. You've forgotten about work. You're 3-4 days into your holiday. You've switched off. You can hear the sound of the sea. You can just look at the blue sky, marvel at the scenery. You're feeling lovely and warm, toasted by the sun. Someone comes up to you, taps you on the shoulder. You look around really, really slowly. Okay? As opposed to, you're sitting on a beach. You've just arrived. It's your first day. You couldn't wait to get there. You've had a lot on your shoulders. Okay? Somebody taps you. You jolt. You look around. Okay? If you want to live in a heightened sense of anticipation all the time with all the stress, you'll overload your sympathetic nervous system or your autonomic nervous system. That's the medical term for sweating and feeling emotional and blushing and all these other symptoms that you have when you're stressed. So if you want the opposite of that, if you want to go into a really, really important meeting where you could win a huge chunk of business, for example, imagine if you go into that and you feel relaxed as hell, but absolutely bang on it. Because you know what? Stress makes you stupid. Relaxed makes you feel the opposite. Whatever the opposite of stupid is. Clever. It clears your head. Why do people come back from holiday and have all these great ideas if they're in business like you and me? You know why? Because they lived in what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. They lived without that heightened sense of anticipation. They relaxed. They switched off. It's why we need weekends to relax. Because what you come back with on the Monday, the creativity in you, the zest, the energy, the enthusiasm, the motivation, the drive, all of that, that comes from living in the parasympathetic. There's the benefits of breathing more relaxed. It's harder to breathe more relaxed when you're on it in the studio or at work or wherever your workplace is, but at least prepare yourself for that by relaxing beforehand. It's a bit like professional athletes. They do their most important work in preparation the day or two before the big game or the big match by doing nothing. They've done the work, they've done the stamina, they've done the skill set stuff. By doing nothing, they prepare their body to go into what they're about to go into. So there's huge benefits for it. And you've got the parasympathetic and you've got the sympathetic nervous system. We need to live around 50-50 in that. If you live in the sympathetic too much, you lead to burnout. So actually, you haven't got a choice. So the benefits of relaxing, breathing in the way I described are huge.
So many entrepreneurs struggle with this, Joel. It's a chronic syndrome, you know, culturally. And my question stroke discussion point is, why do we find it so difficult to take ourselves out of that heightened state, which, if I'm honest, I spent the first 20 years of my career thinking I had to be in that state in order to be at my absolute peak. What are your thoughts on that, Joel? How do we get out of that way of thinking?
I haven't got the answers. I've got a few thoughts and reflections. And I'll start maybe in a slightly curious way. So when we look at kids who come from difficult backgrounds, underprivileged backgrounds, call it what you want. They get on the wrong side of the tracks. They get a criminal record at a teenage age. Sociologists start looking at role models, influences, etc. You are by your association. I get all that. So in the same way, entrepreneurs actually suffer from the same thing in my mind. So let's look at TV and media more broadly. So let's think of Gordon Ramsay. How do you behave as a chef? You behave like Gordon Ramsay, apparently. How do you behave as an entrepreneur? You behave like Alan Sugar, apparently. And various others who behave in a certain way, who are depicted as the ideal role models. What do you do when you start your own business? What are the first few things you do within a year? You get an office, you get a flash car, you get all the bits and pieces. Where's that all come from? So what I'm saying is the image of the entrepreneur seems to be shrouded in a one-dimensional type person. Now, some of the greatest guys I've met in entrepreneurship, that's a word, the world of entrepreneurship, the world of entrepreneurs, they, to me, all smack of the antithesis of that. They are introverts. And I've read enough research to tell you that, share with you that introverts are by far the more dominant type amongst successful entrepreneurs. I won't name names, but I've met a good, probably 50 plus people, entrepreneurs in Liverpool, Merseyside, extremely successful at what they do. They are some of the most relaxed, laid back people I've ever met. And I was shocked actually when I met them, because I thought they might be the other way around. I thought they might be like Danny Wahlberg in that film where he gets up at 4 a.m. He's in the gym. 6 a.m. He's on his protein shake and steaks and everything else. Anyway, by 1 o'clock, looking at his regime, I think I'd be in bed, personally, as opposed to looking at a far more efficient, relaxed, steady way of working. And these guys that I've met, I was literally amazed at the slow, deliberate way they spoke, considered. Someone once told me, one of these guys told me that, he said, think slowly, act quickly. And thought processes like that made me think, you know what? The way to go isn't to run around like a headless chicken. It's actually to be far more considered. And there must be a reason why that tortoise beat the hare.
I love think slowly, act quickly. That's a lovely way of framing this whole conversation, Joel. And it makes me think about the urgency that you feel you need to have as an entrepreneur and how that manifests itself in the way that we act. Entrepreneurs are the figureheads, they're the spearheads of the organizations. And I think they feel a sense of responsibility to create the urgency and the energy within a business. But I really like the thinking around whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, actually you can control the way you present yourself, the way you lead your organization through thinking slowly and acting quickly. That's really, really powerful. So I love that, Joel. I love that. Something I'm really passionate about is self-improvement. And I think that's a big part of what you've been talking about today, Joel. What other steps can we take to break our thinking and to change and to adapt and to evolve as people, as entrepreneurs? Breathing is fantastic. What other things can we do around that that will help control anxiety, depression?
I think overall put far more emphasis on preventative health and really think about what you bring to your game in terms of being an entrepreneur, if we're talking about entrepreneurs here or someone running a business. So in America, there's an increasing number of companies who are hiring people based on their physical as well as their mental agility. So that might sound discriminatory. It's not. It's asking people to adopt a different way of living. So in this pandemic, there's been a huge surge in the number of people who've been vaccinated. Without wishing to focus on that, where's the huge surge in the focus on how to protect ourselves against other health conditions, the way we've been living our life before the pandemic, and preparing ourselves to become far more suitable to the, let's face it, excesses and speed of the Western way? It's been a great time, 14 months, to think about doing things differently. And you know, and I know people within our WhatsApp group who reflected, who are probably far more relaxed now about life than they were pre-pandemic because they've had time to reflect. But what are the long-lasting implications that people can do for themselves to make them think about how to lead a different life, which will be great for both their business and their personal life? We all know the toll that business takes on personal lives. It can wreck families, it can wreck personal lives. Does it really need to, though? So we're in control of how we live our life. So we're in control of sleep to an extent. Many people complain about poor sleep. It's incredibly common. There's more sleep experts than ever before. How we breathe during the day, let's go back to breathing just for a sec. How we breathe during the day determines the quality of our sleep. If we can work on becoming more optimal at our breathing and less dysfunctional, we get better sleep. Sleep is the most important activity we perform every day. It's also an event. People expect to run round that hamster wheel all day and then flop into bed and sleep for 8 hours. Why? No idea. So sleep, huge, absolutely huge for regenerating us. That's number one. Number two, what you put into your body, food and drink wise, is everything. Your gut's your second brain. You won't get away with it if you ignore that fact. Exercise, we know about exercise, but again, let's stop thinking about exercise as alpha males and alpha females. Let's think about exercise that's a bit more gentle and kinder and thoughtful, whether it's based in nature or elsewhere that you prefer, as opposed to trying to beast yourself in a boot camp when you've got all the other stress around you. So exercise can be gentle. Let's think about stuff like our weight, which isn't just to do with exercise and just to do with eating. It's to do with mindfulness. And if you bring mindfulness into your life, to do with those things and bring it into other areas of life. So for example, small tips like maybe only do 75% of the things you think you can do in a day, a week, a month. And bringing mindfulness to you is actually really kind to yourself. It's great being kind to others. I'm always pushing that. But what about being kind to yourself? So an overall protocol, if you like, is to look at those things. Treat them individually with respect, but look at all of them. And I go back just briefly to the parasympathetic. Stop living your life in your sympathetic nervous system on a heightened sense of anticipation. Be like the zebra in the savannah desert. The zebra is surrounded by big cats, okay? It wanders around most of the time without a care in the world, okay? It's why zebras don't get ulcers. The name of a great book by an American physician. They don't get ulcers because they only live in fight or flight when that big cat's chasing them. Why are we living in fight or flight so much? There are no big cats chasing us. We'll have moments, but then we'll deal with that. Otherwise, just live a different way, a more relaxed, more efficient way.
I would say one of the things that has impacted my life the most in the last 5 years is mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness. And I was introduced to it about 5 years ago. I tried it for a year, but I failed at it because I wasn't practicing. I did it a few times a month and thought that that was enough. And what I realized was it was my approach to well-being that was wrong. It was my understanding was wrong, yeah, but my approach was the flawed part. And when I realized that the only thing that was standing in my way was my ego, and my ignorance, and my lack of commitment to what is in reality a very simple thing to do, an incredibly powerful thing to do. And everything you said so far, Joel, has just shouted and resonated so deeply and so loudly with me. It's been really, really interesting. Last couple of points or last couple of questions, Joel. My mission is to demonstrate the benefit of well-being in driving commercial success. And I'm pretty sure that's deeply linked to your mission too. What would be your top 3 tips for entrepreneurs in 2021 to drive commercial success through their own well-being?
Okay. I always go back to breathing because what people don't recognize, and they wouldn't as lay people, you'd have to study form for a long time like I have. The way you breathe manipulates everything in your system. Your brain, your muscles, and your nerves. So if you can physically manipulate how you feel, why wouldn't you do that? You would do it. So in listening to your story there briefly, for some people that I've met that's similar to you, they've got a huge amount of energy, very bright, very ambitious. In the morning especially, they can't keep still. They're not going to do mindfulness or meditation. They can't wait to, I suppose the analogy is running out of the house, shouting from the rooftops, telling everyone how ambitious and full of beans they are. Okay? You literally can't keep still, driven by the likes of cortisol, the stress hormone. Prepare yourself every day to be that person who thinks slowly and act quickly. Do it physically through breathing exercises. I'm talking practically now. Breathing exercises that I'm a huge fan of literally bring my cortisol levels down. They help me to relax more first thing in the morning because I'm always full of beans, thankfully. And they help me to lead and deliver a far more measured life in business. Clarity of thought, clarity of speech, everything, creativity, you name it. If I look at the way I eat light to breathe right. Again, I'm talking about breathing. And thirdly, take those 2 things alone without making it complicated. And be that person who is an example to others. So there is unfortunately too much lip service, without being too negative. There's too much lip service at the moment about wellness in the workplace. I've been to some events pre the pandemic where this was the agenda. Various people, mostly from corporates, would talk about wellness in the workplace, its importance. I'd look over to my left and there was a buffet full of bacon sandwiches and cakes and all kinds of stuff. So I'm saying to people, really, really believe in this. Pick out aspects that you think you can commit to. And by the way, breathing exercises, mindfulness, meditation, they're all so simple, but there's a huge difference between what's simple and what you can commit to. So find those simple ways, bring that wellness into your life in the ways that can work for you, commit to them, and be that person who's the role model, mentioning role models again, who can inspire others to see the benefits and experience the benefits. Because the key word there is experience. I don't talk too much about breathing techniques and breathing education with people I work with on a one-to-one consult basis, or companies or community organizations I go in to see. You know why? Because people will just switch off. But when they experience it, they then talk about it. So I don't talk about it too much. It's all in the experience. We know ourselves how we feel when we pay attention to what we put into our bodies. If you just look at those two things as a starting point and share with others the benefits of it, inspire people. There's three things. Carry that inspiration as a third thing to make a difference to yourself and to others around you.
The most important takeaway I reflect on there, Joel, is being the role model, setting the example, and inspiring others. Because I think that is the role of the entrepreneur. That is the role of the business leader. We are there to set the example. And I know that's something I'm going to be doing more of going forward, having listened to you today and having listened and watched many of the things that you've done over the last couple of years. You know, my final point, and I think I said this to you off air actually, Joel, is whenever I see your post on LinkedIn or in some of the groups that we share, the one thing that I'm reminded to do is to breathe better. And what I love about the work that you do, Joel, and the way that you approach life, the way that you approach your business, is you've got a really simple message built around a lot of deep research and deep thinking and real passion and consideration for your subject. And I just think that's brilliant. And I just want to commend you and thank you for doing the work that you do, because I do think it impacts a lot of people, Joel. So I've thoroughly enjoyed today, Joel, and I'm really grateful for you coming on. Final question, how can people find out more about you and about the work that you do, Joel?
Okay, look at breathren.co.uk, which is breath and ren.co.uk. They can read the blogs, which will unearth some, hopefully what they see as amazing case studies and also insights into the virtues of becoming an optimal breather versus being that dysfunctional breather that's all so common in society for all kinds of reasons. And hopefully they can then turn into the role model that you talked about as the key takeaway for you in this conversation. Although I would say that being a role model is one thing. You've got to be able to deliver on that. And so, Phil, if I see you in the business district in Liverpool with a cheese pasty chaser in your hand walking down the street on a heightened sense of anticipation, you're not going to be that role model you promised me you would be on this podcast. But no pressure.
No pressure at all, Joe. You're absolutely right. We all have to live and set the example. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Thank you for the constant pressure you put on me to be a better person, Joel. It is welcomed and appreciated deeply, seriously. Thank you for being on the podcast today. You've been absolutely fantastic. And if for nothing else, Joel, I feel really relaxed. It's great. I've been deeply breathing the whole time. It's lovely. It's lovely. Joel, in all seriousness, thank you very much. And I wish you all the best.
Cheers, Phil.